Alrighty, so in this section, we're going to walk through moderated mediation with memory and some of the functionality that is and is not available. So first, I wanted to kind of remind you about the different parts of the moderation that are available in memory. So model 4 is the most general model. This would be, I would say, equivalent to model, I think it's 59 in process, but in fact it's not equivalent to that because process doesn't include this XM interaction, and so then that interaction cannot then be moderated. So technically model 4 is actually a little bit different from that. But basically this is the most general and kind of atheoretical model that you can have. And so in many senses it's very exploratory. But so in memory now we can allow for any of the paths in a mediation model to be moderated. And one of the things that I want to point out is that you can have multiple mediators in these models, but they have to be in parallel. And the moderation structure has to be the same across all of the mediators. So currently there's not a way to allow for, let's say, the B path of M1 to be moderated, but the B path of M2 is not moderated, and maybe the A path for M2 is moderated, but the B path or A path for M1 is not moderated, things like that. I'm not quite there yet. That's definitely something that I would like to build in, but is not currently on the docket. But if you're interested in those kinds of things, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help with kind of adjusting syntax for models that aren't currently available in memory. So statistically, what's going on under the hood is that we are estimating a bunch of difference scores, which are the difference between the mediators at the two repeated measures instances, and then we're predicting those using a variety of other variables. So in particular, the intercept is often representing the effect of our repeated measures factor. And to allow that to be moderated, we include W as a predictor in the model. When we are allowing the effect of a different variable, for example, the difference between the mediators on the difference between the outcomes to be moderated, we then include an interaction term. So down here, we have the interaction between W and MD1, and then up here, we have the interaction between W and the mean-centered average of the mediators. So this is the most complex model that is available, and all of the models with higher numbers are simplified in some way. And so as you look at the model templates, like we reviewed in the previous video, you'll see that the models with higher numbers are actually more simple. So there's a variety of functionality for moderated mediation built in. A lot of what I've done is incorporated old functions that were available for mediation or for moderation and made sure that they work for the new moderated mediation sections. So for example, the Johnson-Neyman technique is available for any of the conditional effects that are in the model. This is only used for continuous moderators, and the Johnson-Neyman technique is only done for the interactions that are in the model specifically, and not the conditional indirect effects, just because the conditional and indirect effects, we make inference on those based on bootstrapping, and so the Johnson-Neyman technique doesn't really work in that case. We also have the quantile option. So the default in memory is to probe at the mean plus and minus 1 standard deviation of the moderator when you have a continuous moderator. And an alternative that Dr. Hayes has really kind of pushed is to probe at the quantiles of the distribution. So based on the observed distribution of the moderator, probe at those different values. And this is particularly valuable if the distribution of your moderator is skewed, because the mean plus and minus 1 standard deviation could be outside the range of your data. And there's nothing in the mechanics of the way that the model is estimated that would tell you that that is the case. Additionally, if there are specific values that you want to probe any of the conditional effects or the conditional indirect effects at, then you can use the W mod val options. The plot options will give you options for plotting the interactions that are estimated in the model. And then the Monte Carlo option, so the MC option, will give you Monte Carlo confidence intervals for the conditional indirect effects and the indices of moderated mediation. And this is in lieu of the percentile bootstrap confidence interval. So the default is the percentile bootstrap confidence interval, but you could also use the Monte Carlo confidence interval. The normal option will give you Sobel test for the conditional indirect effects and the indices of moderated mediation. The conf option will let you change the level of your confidence intervals. And one thing that I would just mention is that we oftentimes, when we are estimating models that have a lot of coefficients and potentially a lot of mediators, we may want to start adjusting for multiple comparisons. And one way that you can do that is by increasing the level of your confidence interval. So if you typically do a 95% confidence interval, say you have 5 moderators, in fact, you might want to do a 99% confidence interval. The samples option can fill in the number of bootstraps or Monte Carlo estimates. There isn't a lot of recommendations out there for how many samples you should have, but in the thousands is probably a good range. Mostly the limitation is what your computer can do and how long you're willing to wait. So that option you can use to adjust the number of bootstraps. The default is 5,000. The save option allows you to save the bootstrap estimates or the Monte Carlo estimates as a separate data set, and this can be very useful if you want to calculate some things that are not calculated in memory, but you still want the results to be consistent with the output of memory. You can in fact save the bootstrap estimates and then calculate those additional things outside of memory. I've talked a lot about this XMint option. So this includes or excludes the M average term in the model for Y. Essentially what this is doing is if we take this out, we're assuming that there's no interaction between X and M in predicting Y. Most of between subjects mediation has been making this assumption for many years, but it's something that's pretty easy to include in these models. And so I've included it rather than excluded it. But if you want to take it out of your model, you're more than welcome to. The center option will mean center moderators, and in the first section of this playlist, I walked through some of the new options that are there. So center equals 1 will center all of the moderators. Center equals 2 will center all of the non-dichotomous moderators. So I tend to code my moderators as like dichotomous moderators as like 0, 1. And so 0 is really meaningful. And so centering it kind of takes that away. So I added that option in this newest version. A couple things that are worth noting is that not everything is available in this tool yet. Things that I definitely have on my to-do list, but I wanted to work on this first release and get some functionality for moderated mediation out there. So some things that are not available with moderated mediation, you cannot do serial moderated mediation. So we can't yet incorporate the serial moderation. So in this case, if you want to do a serial moderated mediation, you could reach out to me or one of my grad students, and we'd be happy to help you. There is currently no functionality to do contrasts of conditional indirect effects. So if you're used to doing parallel mediator models or even serial mediator models, you might know that there's a contrast option that allows you to compare the indirect effects to each other. Currently, that's not built into the moderated mediation models, and so you would not be able to directly compare conditional indirect effects, but this is something that you could do if you save the bootstrap estimates. You could then get a bootstrap confidence interval for the difference between the conditional indirect effects if you wanted. And currently, memory is only accommodating one moderator for the moderated mediation models. So the moderation models, models 2 and 3, still accommodate up to 5 moderators. But for now, the moderated mediation models only handle one moderator. And so if you have cases that fill these things, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I will probably refer you to one of my graduate students to help you out, but there are ways to do this. We know how to do this. It's really just a question of getting it implemented in the software. So that is kind of the review for moderated mediation, and I hope you enjoy using MEMORE.